Welcome to another bonus episode of the Paul Ryder tapes. We're almost at the end of the run now. I can't believe it's been almost a year since we started this. My goodness. We have a really special guest for you in this episode. He is a crucial part of Manchester culture. Even though he grew up in Blackpool, he's had two bands that have had huge cult success. The Membranes and Goldblade. As well as being a musician, he's also a journalist and a cultural commentator. Indeed, he was a regular on a show that I produced 20 years ago called Turn on Terry with Terry Christian that was made for ITV alongside Tony Wilson. And he was also the founder of the fabulous music website Louder Than War, and also is the author of a number of brilliant books, including his latest, which is called The Art of Darkness, The History of Goth. He also happens to be a really lovely man who has fabulous skin and an infectious giggle. It is, of course, the legend that is John Robb. How are you doing, John? It's nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
So are you good, John?
Yeah, just really busy. Yeah, my book's done really well, so I've been on a book tour, like a never-ending book tour.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it's really good to see you. How long? It's been a long time. How long's it been? About 15 years?
Probably, yeah, crazy, isn't it? Yeah, probably even longer. Just after Turn on Terry, and that was about 20 years ago, wasn't it?
I know, yeah. It was about 2005, I think, or maybe even earlier, I don't know. Yeah, I remember Paul always used to say that you had lovely skin. Do you remember?
He did. Every time I met him, I've forgotten about that, yeah. That's really funny. I don't really do the rock and roll lifestyle unlike everybody else.
Well, you do it differently, don't you? You do the healthy rock and roll version of it, don't you?
Yeah. I like to feel good. I don't like to feel shit, so, yeah.
Can we start off by talking about Tony Wilson and his influence on the city, and in particular with reference obviously to Factory and the Mondays?
Well, with Tony Wilson, he was the guy that joined everybody together. I mean, and he tested you as well, which I really liked. So my personal experience of Tony will be when I was always going home, I always cut through past his flat because I live in Hume for years. And every time I see Tony, we'd have an argument about pop culture in the street. And it could get quite heated sometimes, but he never fell out with him, you know, because he liked debate and he liked arguing, and that was good, you know. That was a really good thing about him. I think he had a lot of energy. He was a driving force, and he made people meet each other. They're all key things that he did. They don't sound like much, but they are really important. So big things with Tony would be, why don't this person meet that person, go do that thing, which is actually really creative, more than anything that's creative. And also, like a lot of those kind of people, they create the what do they do? Well, they always say they create the playground that everyone can play in, don't they? So by creating Factory Records, by creating the Hacienda, he made the space where all this kind of stuff happened, didn't he? He didn't. Not everything in Manchester was down to Tony. I mean, but having an advantage over any other city was having the local media guy that everybody knew, who's into your kind of music, you know. And I remember before punk, when he was on the telly in all his denims and long hair, you used to think he's like your cool hippie older brother, isn't he? And it made you think, wow, the North is actually quite cool. We have like cool people on the telly, you know. And he seemed to know about music culture. And then when he started doing So It Goes, that was a game changer, I think. I think probably more than anything he ever did, that was the key. Having the Sex Pistols' first ever TV appearance in the world, 6 weeks before Bill Grundy, was massive, you know. Where everyone else was kind of worried about what they were putting them on. There they were, just down the road in Granada TV. He's got them on the telly. And only kids in the northwest of England could see that. We had a 6-week head start over everyone else, because even as 15, 16-year-olds, we got to see the Pistols. They weren't just faded pictures in music papers or interviews. There they were on the telly in real life, you know, and that's a revolution, you know, and that was important. So when he started doing Factory Records, I mean, that was so key as well. The thing about Factory was, because it was brilliantly pretentious, because it had an aesthetic, it had an idea. It wasn't just putting records out. I mean, the most telling thing is, in it, that Tony's funeral is the last Factory number. I mean, Factory Records is almost a story of Tony's life in a sense, and it's signposted all the way through. And to have a label in Manchester that wasn't just putting out any old records, each record had a reason to it, had an aesthetic to it, was super important as well. And at some point, obviously, Joy Division are going to end up on that record because Ian Curtis was as smart as Tony. You know, Ian Curtis had a concept for what Joy Division were, and they're bound to coalesce at some point, and that happened. And when Joy Division broke through, suddenly Manchester's on the map as being the leading post-punk city in the world, you know. So you'd expect London, because it had punk, to go to post-punk and be ahead of the game, but Manchester stole a march there. You know, we already had the Buzzcocks, who were one of the greatest of all the punk bands, but when Joy Division came through, we're 10 years ahead of everybody else, you know, and that was really inspiring to kids all over the city. So how do you follow it up? I mean, he had ACR, Sector 25, really good bands, but in a way, the Happy Mondays were the second great act of Factory Records, you know. And it took the genius of Tony to understand that there was something there in a bunch of mad, scruffy kids. And he saw it. He saw there was something there. I think he saw he had his own Sex Pistols. That's what he really wanted. And there was a potential for controversy with the Happy Mondays. But I think he also saw something beyond that as well. He saw a sophistication and an intelligence and an artfulness to the Happy Mondays that most other people didn't. They were just kind of this bunch of mad kids who were running around town. We used to rehearse next door to them in the boardwalk, like, this is super early. This must be about 84, 85, you know, just when they're coming to, I mean, obviously I know they rehearsed in Salford before that. And they were just kind of this mad, leery looking gang who were always like, they rehearsed every single day. Whatever day you went in there, they'd be rehearsing. We thought, wow, these work really hard, because most bands only ever rehearse about once a month. And they're always quite stoned. And they always play football on the street, on Little Peter Street outside as well. So that was quite impressive. They seemed to just do stuff together en masse all the time. And they sounded brilliant when you could hear them coming through the walls. They just sounded like some bizarre avant-garde band. But at that time, bizarre avant-garde bands would look like my band or Captain Beefheart. They didn't look like normal kids. It's hard to compute in your head that these normal-looking lads can make such weird-looking music. Because at that point in time, heads dressed like heads. I've never seen like match lads or whatever, normal lads making music that genius, you know. But Tony saw that and he got it, didn't he? Super early on, like a couple of years before that, he was on it. You know, when they played the Hacienda, one of their first gigs, second gigs, it was the first one's Blackpool, I think, innit, the GPO club, which we'd actually played a week before. That's the other weird thing, because I know the GPO club in Blackpool, where it was like Wheel Tappers and Shunters social club. I mean, the idea that the Mondays played there is quite mental, but the week played there as well, and they didn't really want us in there. We were too loud and everything, because it just had comedians and puppet shows or whatever. So they played the thing at the Hacienda, and then I think probably that's where probably Rob as well, because Rob Gretton's always lurking in the background somewhere, isn't he? I mean, I think Rob Gretton gets written out of the story too much. He's not so much part of the Monday story, but I think he'd be in there somewhere at that point. But Tony got it, and that was an amazing thing. Really instinctive, you know where most people go, yeah, that band's good, but if I sign them, no one's going to get it, so I probably won't sign them, I'm not sure. People like Tony, they just go in like a herd of buffaloes. It's genius, I'm signing it. If you don't get it, tough shit, I'm just going to sign it anyway. And that's another brilliant thing about those kind of people. They kind of stake everything on things that most people think just ain't going to work. Because in 84, 85, a band like the Happy Mondays had zero chance of making it. There was nothing like them at all. They were so original, culturally, musically. What's their audience? They're not really an indie band. They're not this band or that band. They're completely on their own. It's a fantastically odd thing for Tony to sign, but he made sense of it. And also, because probably luckily for him, the culture changed, because when all the kids started taking E, they got psychedelic heads on them, and then they could understand stuff like as esoteric as Monday. You know, if you have a psychedelic revolution on your own, it's just you, but when everyone else joins in, suddenly you're the soundtrack.
Can you talk a little bit about Paul's bass playing? How would you describe it? How would you define it?
I would say that, well, all great bass players are a spine of a band, but a really great bass player is something else. It's on top of that. So, I mean, there's a lot of really genius factors about the Happy Mondays. I mean, obviously Shaun's lyrics are brilliant, and that weird kind of persona, split frontman persona of Shaun and Bez, where basically Shaun hides behind Bez and gets Bez to do all the kind of crazy Mick Jagger stuff, and he does all these amazing lyrics, which they're very key to the band, but without being able to dance to them, it doesn't work. And the danceability of the Mondays comes from the bass line. So because he was into Northern Soul, so he had that, and he had that swing thing, which is really difficult to get. I mean, there's a lot of great bass players who don't swing, but Paul had a swing to his bass playing, so you could dance. And also they're really melodic, and a lot of the time, like a lot of post-punk, and they are kind of fringe post-punk, the bass guitar is often the most important instrument in post-punk. It's like, it would swing, it would play the melodies, it would drive the band along, and the guitar players, and it's great, he's a great guitar player, but he would play off the bass lines instead of leading the sound. And it's part of the uniqueness of Happy Mondays is because it's driven by the bass as well, and also because he just stood there like rock solid, just playing the bass. It was something, the way he stood and the way he kind of moved, the way his persona on the stage really matches the sound of his bass lines. People slightly older like me, when we played, we would run around on the stage. You know, it's more of an energy thing. With the Mondays, they didn't move around, but they kind of grooved along in their own little way, didn't they? So it'd just be like a very lilting groove, but a groove. But most of the energy is probably in the hands, going into the bass and that. They are great bass lines. I mean, I did write a track once, and he did, down, wasn't a Zoom there about 10 years ago, but he did give me a bass line actually. It's a really great bass line, just stuck on this track that I never really put out in the end. And it's one that he did a little 5-minute job, and it was great. You know, he just swinged it, and it was a really good bass line. It was just like this track I had, and I said, "Do you want to stick a bass on it?" And he just stuck a bass on it, and it was really fucking good. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, his bass line was better than, well, obviously it was better than the track. You know, I bump into Paul all over town actually. You know, because I think one of the great things I've always loved about Manchester is the bands all know each other, and there's not, some cities have this really weird competitiveness where all the bands hate each other. But it never felt like that to me in Manchester. All the bands, no matter how different you were musically or stylistically, there was a camaraderie. When I met him, we'd chat for ages and that, you know, seeing him around. Every time he met me, he used to say I had really nice skin, which is like really unsoulful thing to say, isn't it, you know? And then one night when I met him, I was walking down Oldham Street, and we were chatting away, and this really mad psychotic bloke was really staring like that, and he got nearer and nearer, and then he goes, "I'm going to kill you," and he started prodding me in the chest, and it's just like this really mad conversation, and it's like, and like Paul looked a little bit like, "Oh God, what's going on?" And I was thinking, what the fuck's going on? I didn't know who this bloke was. And this kind of went off, this weird standoff for about 10 minutes, but I didn't really want to go away because I was having a conversation. So look, mate, I'm just having a chat with my mate here, you know, and the bloke was really staring like, he's like a caring community type character. That was just because we happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Probably the craziest thing was he was that intense, and then in the end, after about 15 minutes of really staring while we were still trying to have this conversation, he kind of just wandered off. Like in the boardwalk, we see him, you know, he's probably, at that time, he's probably the most friendly out of all of them, you know. I think because Shaun's actually quite shy, but they're both quite shy in a weird way, you know, and I think, but Shaun's more kind of shy. I think Paul was the one who would actually say hello to you. I see him a lot of gigs, see him bump into him like all over the place, really.
Can you talk a little bit about being on Turn on Terry with Paul and how you felt about him being in the house band?
Well, Turn on Terry is like a series. It's basically a reviews programme on telly which you made, and Terry was the main host, but you changed the guests around every week, didn't you? So Alison Hammond was one of the guests, and she's like TV gold now. I think that was really early days for her. Tony was on, yeah.
Yeah, it was mainly you and Tony Wilson, and then we had some rotating people come in, yeah, including Alison Hammond.
I mean, it's like everybody got a massive, great TV career out of the back of it, apart from me. So I was on that. We had a really good laugh. It was great fun to do, and it was great having Paul as a house band.
Turn on your TV, click it on channel 3. Gotta watch the show. Did you see the show? Got the remote, let's go. Why don't you turn on Terry? Why don't you turn on Terry? Why don't you turn on Terry? So turn on Terry, don't be lazy. Gonna watch the show.
That's always the old thing about Happy Mondays, isn't it? All those guys in that band, they work really well in showbiz, even though they were quite mad people and quite renegade people. Any opportunity, any kind of showbiz, they can do it, and it doesn't blemish them. A lot of people do kind of showbizy things, and instantly say, why are you doing a cabaret TV thing? It wouldn't work, would it? But with them, like Shaun or Bears or Paul, you put them into that context, and they seem complete naturals at it. But I think that comes from the dad, doesn't it? Because he was writing gags, wasn't he, for the BBC for about £1 a gag, wasn't he? And they were nicking his gags and all that. But they did have a weird showbiz background, didn't they? Like a very homespun, working class Salford showbiz background. But it didn't faze them, did it? I don't think with Paul or Shaun or any of those guys out that band, wherever you put them, they just carried on being themselves, didn't they? Which always works in a showbiz context, doesn't it? I met him in a bar in Chicago one night, in this mad bar, yeah. I just went in there and he was in there. They must have been on tour, is it New York? New Music Seminar, that was. And we were up to about 5 in the morning just chatting about stuff. Yeah, I think actually that night, them days I was a bit more off my head. And I was way more off my head than he was, which isn't something you could say often about the Happy Mondays. They knew how to have a good time, that's for sure. Yeah. It was always nice bumping into him, he's one of the good guys and that.
How did you feel when you found out that he died?
It's sad, and it felt like you lost somebody. It feels like one of the clan, one of the family, So it was sad, really sad.
Would you say it sent shockwaves through the Manchester music scene?
Yeah, if there was a shock in the scene, of course there was. It was just right out of the blue and that, But musicians have always sadly died quite young. Not all, but a lot of musicians. Not everybody's like Mick Jagger or Keith Richards. I mean, Jesus Christ, how did Keith Richards end up being nearly 80 years old? That's utterly insane, isn't it? But it was like, there's a high mortality rate in being a musician, isn't it? It's a very stressful life. People don't really look after themselves. It's a lot of people aren't really cut out to be, very talented people aren't really cut out to be in touring bands. It's not an easy life. It looks really easy. It looks like the best life in the world, and sometimes it can be the best life in the world. It's great. It's like being on a ship of pirates going around the world. It's fantastic. But on the other level, it's really wearing. You're jumping time zones. You're stressed all the time. The highs are as stressful as the lows. It does burn people out. And the attendant lifestyle that sort of comes with it doesn't really do a lot of people any good either. So there's a lot of factors that mean that a lot of musicians aren't really often going to get to 90 years old unless you're Bruce Mitchell, who's going to outlive us all, isn't he? I mean, Bruce was he 83 now? Bruce is the only person left in the world who still calls me kid. I've not done anything this year because you won't be able to see it, but this scar here, I wrecked my arm this year. I ripped all the tendons off my arm. So for about 4 or 5 months I couldn't play a bass because I couldn't stretch my arm out like that. I could play guitar because I can hunch up on it. So I had to take a bit of time out, which is really frustrating. Because that's actually the thing that I like to do. That's my main thing, but my band's never got beyond being a cult band, so I have to do everything else.
Yeah, but you do have huge cult status.
That's nice, and I appreciate that. But we didn't have the, going back to the Mondays, they had the genius of turning their madness into pop music, whereas we never worked out how you could turn it into pop music. And I love pop music as well, I'm not really an underground artist, I'm stuck in the underground. But and I like a lot of underground music, but what was great about the Mondays was they distilled what they were doing, those mad jams they were having, into absolutely brilliant pop records, right from the start. Their early records, the super early ones, they were like pop records, but when they really hit that groove and having top 10 hits, they made it look so effortless and so natural. And you're still sitting there thinking, but they're actually quite weird. They're quite a wonky, weird band who somehow made it into pop. You wouldn't, if you were like a major label, you would not design a pop band like the Happy Mondays, would you, ever?
And if they had signed to a major label, it would have destroyed them.
I think they would have destroyed the major label. I don't think you can make the Happy Mondays do anything, They are what they are. And they also, but they have a brilliant sense of pop. That's the thing, like Paul's bass lines are really catchy, like Shaun's weird turns of phrase are really pop. They resonate with people, don't they? And they do make brilliant pop, and maybe all the greatest pop is that totally natural thing, isn't it? which we in the north we're really good at, you know. I mean, obviously bands in London can do it, but there's countless bands in the north of England could do it, isn't there? Apart from mine.
So do you feel like the Mondays were completely natural, or was there an element of any contrivance?
Oh, zero contrivance. They are what they are. So even when Paul Oakenfeld's mixing them and mixing them into more of a pop thing, he can only work with what he's got, and what he would be doing is sitting there with his vision of the Happy Mondays, which is already the Happy Mondays anyway. All he's doing is shoehorning the Happy Mondays back into the Happy Mondays box. You know, it's like you can't go to Happy Mondays and go, what's number one on the charts now? Why don't you do a version of that? That doesn't work. You know, it's just everybody worked with Happy Mondays was working within the framework of what the Happy Mondays is. You know, they already provided the raw template of the pop, didn't they? So whether it was John Cale, whether it was Martin Hannett, whether it's Paul Oakenfold, whether it was Andy Weatherall, you know, they're all working within their vision of the Happy Mondays, which is the Happy Mondays. You can't contrive the Happy Mondays. It's completely natural. You know what? I find it really annoying. I find it annoying that they're not appreciated as much as they should be. Like nowadays, in the scheme of things, they're not as big as they should be. They do well. I'm not, you know, they go out and they play those 2,000 capacity venues, great, you know. And then they do second on the bills, Primal Scream. Primals are a great band and that, but the Mondays start this whole thing. It'd be like going to watch the Sex Pistols support the Boomtown Rats. Where's the justice in that? They should be headlining these things, you know. And I think they got so omnipresent that people forget their genius. People just think they're kind of this funny, cool bands, but they don't realise that there's actually an innate genius to what they do. But of course, you ask them that and they have no idea. If you say to Shaun, your lyrics are brilliant, he just goes, no, the shit, I just make them up, they're a joke, you know. And Paul will be probably saying the bass lines, you know, that's great bass line. I don't know, I'm just playing the bass. I mean, maybe those are the best kind of bands, the bands that have no idea of how fucking brilliant they are. And maybe that was the brilliance of Tony, the first person who probably walked in the room and go, fuck me, this actually is genius. And the band are going, who's this lunatic off the telly? We're not genius, we're just messing about. But Tony saw it like an instinctive thing, where they see it and they shout about it really loudly. And everyone else goes, what are you going on about, Tony? You know, there's just a ramshackle mess. He goes, no, they're genius. And he'd be the only person in the world who gets it. And that, to me, is a brilliant talent.
There's been a lot of talk about the antagonism between Shaun and Paul. Do you think that impeded the band in any way, or do you think it added to the magic?
I think it probably impeded in a way. Didn't it? Probably impeded if you're in the band. Well, brothers love and hate each other. That's just the way it is, isn't it? I get on pretty well with my brother, but he's kind of a different version of me. But I think with brothers, you see yourself in your brother. So that annoying thing your brother does is actually you. So that annoying laugh your brother has is your laugh, or that annoying way he tells a joke is you, isn't it? That's the bits that annoy each other, isn't it? When you think it's like a mirror held up to you, isn't it? And probably the bits that are different from you, the bits you like generally, isn't it? It's like your parents as well, isn't it? The bits that bug you about your parents are the bits that are very close to you, isn't it? And if you're in a band, I mean, it's a weird world. I mean, most people go to jobs. You know, they sit in an office, they kind of get on with each other and they do their work and go home and don't see each other. But in a band, it's 24/7, it's relentless. You know, you go on a 5-week tour of America where all British bands split up. You're stuck on a tour bus and you do a gig and then you get on the bus and you sat next to each other. Then you get up the next morning, then you sat next to each other. There's no getting away from it. And it's a very high stress environment. And also there's levels of attention, isn't there? You know, you know, the great thing about the Mondays is that each constituent member is really important to that band. I mean, Gaz is actually a very sensitive, talented, artistic guy, but people just think he's just the drummer in the Happy Mondays, which must be really annoying for him, you know, and people just think Bez is just a dancer. He's not just a dancer, is he? He's a conductor. He conducts a whole audience, you know, but obviously the focus will go on Shaun and Bez because there's nothing like them in pop culture, you know, and they are great characters. But that must be really hard for Paul, you know, because Paul and Shaun are equally talented in different ways, aren't they? And the spotlight, and it's not like people go into bands just to get a spotlight, but people like to get credit for what they do. And when the whole story just becomes a story about, you know, a couple of members of the band doing mad shit all the time, you're thinking, yeah, but I play really good bass or I play really good guitar. You think, well, but it's not like that, you see. You have to understand the media isn't really interested in a bass player or bass lines or guitar lines. Musicians are, You know, people in my world, we go, whoa, listen to the bass on that, it's killer. You know, God, that swings, it's amazing. But if you're just a mainstream media person, you don't even know what the bass or the guitar, the keyboards are. You have no interest in that. And it's a poison chalice you get in it when you're a musician. You know, you could be in a really big band, but you could be invisible in a famous band. And I understand the frustration of that people have. And I'm not saying I'm not even saying that's Paul was frustrated with that, but I'd understand if he was, you know. Because in a classic band and a perfect band like the Mondays, each constituent member is equally important, you know. But the way he's treated in the media, as a spotlight sort of fades on the equally constituent important members, puts them in the background, which is, it's a drag after 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. How important do you think drugs are to the Monday story? I mean, obviously E's were important and contributed in one sense, but with respect to the Mondays and the issues of drugs, the fact that it almost destroyed a couple of members of the band, how important do you think that has been to their trajectory? Do you think it's impeded it? Do you think it's been a positive thing, even though it was negative?
No, yeah. Well, I think the drugs thing was definitely part of the story. You know, I think when the E thing got really massive, they were definitely the Pied Pipers of the scene, weren't they? They were soundtracking it. You know, the Madchester Rave On EP, to me, is the pinnacle of the Mondays. It's an amazing record. And it's such an odd record, it kind of woozes and it's weird, and when you listen to it, and also the live version Wrote for Luck, if you watch that on YouTube now with headphones on, you feel like you're on E. It's got that kind of woozy feeling to it. They perfectly soundtracked, and in the up period of E, when everyone's taking E's, and it was brilliant, and everyone's having a really great time, and it was a beautiful period for a year and a half, because this is the complexity of drugs, isn't it? You know, there's massive downsides, but the upsides are really up, aren't they? You know, some of the best experiences that people have in their lives and some of the strongest relationships that people form are from when the drugs are good. But when the drugs are bad, it's a completely different story, isn't it? Growing up in Salford in the early 80s, you remember when the riots had happened on the streets and suddenly heroin was super cheap afterwards, and everyone's always going, oh, yeah, what's going on there? The government's, suddenly all these kids who were in a riot 2 weeks ago are all on smack now. You know, what's government up to? You know, think, can they be that cynical? Probably, you know, and it's, you know, and it flooded the scene, didn't it? And you understand, like, you know, when they're in a band that's doing well, you know, I'd always think, well, you don't need to take the drugs, you're having a great time. Of course, they already were into the drugs because they were coming from a place and time where it was stuff was shit, you know, and the only escape from that world was getting lost into drugs, you know, and not particularly great drugs either, you know, and it's a different city there, Manchester, you know, like we're sitting here on a sunny day now, and this is one of the greatest cities in the world, you know, which, you know, let's go back to Tony. This city would not look like this if it wasn't for Tony. And also, Tony would not have that platform if it wasn't for Joy Division and Happy Mondays. It's all part of this thing, you know. What makes the city amazing now, and just behind us, you know, massive 70-storey towers. Every cool kid in fucking Europe wants to live here. It's because of the Mondays and the Roses and Tony and the whole story. The music created the city, built the city. It was the world's first post-industrial city, and now it's the world's first post-punk city. And it wasn't just Tony. Tony had the vision for that. But without the Mondays, you know, we wouldn't have egged him on, spurred him on, or without the soundtrack, you don't get the result. But before all that, it was a pretty grim place to live, you know. I mean, well, when I moved here from Blackpool, though, I mean, of course, to me, it was dead exciting. It was like, wow, it's a whole city, and it's like loads of different cultures here. Blackpool's just white people, and that was it. Coming here was amazing. It was like, but if you'd grown up here, or a place like Salford, it was a bit grimmer. You know, I always lived round the centre, you know, and in town and Hume and that, you know, where it's cheaper to live and stuff, and that was a different experience, you know. But there was a grimness, a downside to Manchester, and the only escape from it was probably drifting into heroin, which I think, to me personally, I always say it's just the worst drug. I mean, no matter how high that drug ever gets you, I've never met anybody who came out the other side in a better place. It's just a really hard drug to get off. But also, I think we treat drug addicts not the right way. People feel ashamed to be drug addicts, and I never look down on anybody who's got a drug problem, because it's a weakness, it's an illness, you know. There's nothing wrong with having a weakness. You see, we're all northern males, we don't have any weaknesses, or if we do, we don't tell anybody. But there's nothing wrong with having a weakness, and there's nothing wrong with being susceptible to heroin or whatever, you know. But a lot of these guys, they were too embarrassed to talk about it, you know, or they felt ashamed, you know. They shouldn't feel ashamed, you know. They should. People should encourage them to find help, or support. It should not be punished for it. It's not a punishable offence, is it? The punishment should be dealt out to people who created the environment so bad that they only escape for very smart kids like Paul, like Shaun, like Bez, once they get into drugs, create mad drugs, There's kids like that now today, 16-year-old kids living in the back end of Salford, and their only escape is drugs and crime. The people who create those situations, they're the criminals, not the people taking the drugs. People taking the drugs are the victims, and we should look after them because they're our brothers and our sisters, aren't they?
That's absolutely spot on. I absolutely 100% agree with you.
I would have helped Paul, but there's nothing worse than somebody saying, you know what, you shouldn't really take drugs because you just sound so patronising, doesn't it? Just come down the gym with me, A few of my mates in the gym, they were ex-heroin addicts and they just got addicted to exercise instead, And everyone's got an addictive personality. You just have to find something that doesn't do you in. And to me, actually, alcohol is the worst drug. I think alcohol causes violence, people going home beating their wives up. It causes more deaths than any other drug ever does. And because it's legal, and because it's quite insipid and it creeps up on you, more people I know have had problems with alcohol than any other drug put together. I would legalise all drugs, but I would have them that you had to get them with maybe on a script or some advice or some backups. You had somewhere to fall back down on, because people take them anyway. Having them illegals made fuck all difference. But I would encourage people not to take drugs. It doesn't make you rock and roll if you take drugs. I've done drugs when I was a teenager and I had a great time. I was more into hallucinogenics. When we took magic mushrooms, we didn't walk around down the middle of a dual carriageway taking them because we knew that would probably go wrong. We just went to our mate's house who had he had a dad who was really deaf and had no idea what we were all doing. There's about 10 of us taking magic mushrooms, playing records full blast. That's what we used to play. We used to play Can albums, and we didn't even know that they're cool now, but we had no idea they were cool. They were just really great to listen to, Magic Mushrooms. And that was another band that influenced the Happy Mondays, because I could hear it in the Happy Mondays. You think, wow, how bizarre. You never met kids like that who were into Can in Blackpool anyway, and you could hear it, like Paul was massively into Can. You could hear it on his bass and everything, in the grooves. The music they listened to was so crazy. You could hear in all the tracks. It was this really weird mixture of influences that somehow sounded completely different. They sort of made it into the Happy Mondays, didn't they?
Do you remember the day when Factory went under? Was that a very important time, would you say?
I remember the day very clearly when Factory went down. I went down to the Factory building. I was there, I was watching it. Was it covered in Monday's posters or was it covered in New Order posters a month later, wasn't it? I was disappointed, really. I mean, I could see it coming. My mate was actually one of the accountants around Factory, and he knew that it was in a hole. What I wanted Tony to do, and of course, I mean, it's a lot easier for me to say because I don't have to do it, but I wanted a northern music business. I thought, I did have a meeting with Tony, said we should have a northern music paper as well, based up here. Why do I have to go to London to present all my ideas to London music papers who didn't really... I mean, I was lucky, I wrote for Sounds and they let me write about what I want and they were brilliant people. But some of the other papers, they used to look on Northerners as all being stupid. When I went to Melody Maker, they used to do impersonations of your accent behind your back like you were stupid. Oh, like Northerners, like we talk like that, we're really stupid because we don't talk in public school accents. It was like crazy, wasn't it? But I wanted Tony, and I don't know, why should he have to do this, but why couldn't we have a Northern music paper? Of course, it's hard work setting up any type of media, even then, they always go bust in the extra papers, but what would have been a brilliant thing if you had a Northern newspaper, a Northern major record label, and the whole thing. I think maybe Tony should have listened to Mike Pickering a little bit more, because Mike was brilliant. I think Mike's the guy who gets written out of this whole story. He's in the Monday story as well, of course, but he was the guy who played Acid House first at the Hacienda. He booked all the bands in there. He booked all the DJs in there. He brought Kylie Minogue, didn't he, to Factory. He said, why don't you sign Kylie Minogue? Which is total genius, Why can't Factory have a pop side to it as well? And it probably would have saved the label. There's a few other things he tried to bring in there as well. And that's when he went to set up Deconstruction instead, wasn't it? And I think And I'll always big up Mike Pickering because he knows his music and he knows his shit, you know, but he's too humble to take the credit, you know. So I thought maybe that's one of my jobs as a writer. I have to tell the truth, don't I? I say, the narrative isn't that little tiny narrative that big. There's somebody else over here, somebody else over here. We've got to talk about these other people as well. So that was my disappointment factor going down. I thought there's an opportunity to create a northern music powerhouse, for want of a better word, which we have now. You know, it's here now, isn't it? You know, the new factory building, which they've given some stupid name that nobody can ever remember. There's so many bands here. What those guys at NQ Records are doing, you know, they're doing grime and rap, but they're building on a factory style model, you know, and it's here now. We got it. We had the thing that Tony could have done 20, 30 years ago, but it's a lot harder to actually do it than sort of talk about it.
You know, it's really funny you should say that, because for years I wanted to approach Tony with the idea of setting up a television arm for Factory.
You could do it now, you know. You probably should just come back to Manchester, you know, because it's not the city you left now. It's quite weird as a joke. I've got some friends who's setting up a radio station here, been showing them around today, and they go, "Wow, this is not what's happened to Manchester." And I go, "Well, it's LA now, isn't it? It looks more like LA than Manchester, you know, the centre." It's one of the main cities in Europe. It's not like this cocky city that thinks, like a little dog thinks the big dog. It actually is the big dog now. It's one of the 10 major cities in Europe. You know, Berlin, Paris, London, Manchester. You know, it's not like Tony. Tony's brilliant because he bigged the city up all the time, but he wouldn't have to do that now. If Tony somehow came back now and walked around, people go, put a blindfold on him, it'll freak him out in a second around the centre, took the blindfold off, say, look at these massive buildings, Tony, go, well, I knew they'd be there. He'd be totally unshocked, you know, whereas everyone else goes, who hasn't been here for a year, goes, what the fuck? This is a completely different place. Yeah, it is, but Tony, in his head, thought it looked like this already. I'm really glad you give me a chance to celebrate their genius, the collective genius of the Mondays. I think they're an amazing band, all the way across the board, each constituent person in them. And the dad, you know, I think he's a key part of it, really. And the whole thing, and they started the whole thing, didn't they? The Rosies were amazing because they distilled it into that amazing first album, you know, it's a beautiful record. But without the Mondays, that record probably would never have existed in the same way at all, you know. And they would tell you that. The Mondays were the game changers right across the whole scene, you know. I was thinking about that as well with Britpop, which I made up the term Britpop. but that would not have existed without the Mondays as well. They changed the whole culture, and they don't get the credit for it, because Britpop was basically London doing Manchester 4 years after Manchester, wasn't it? But they did. But you can't copy the Mondays. That's why, apart from Flowered Up, who did their London version of it, very few bands could do a direct copy of the Mondays because it's so idiosyncratic and so original. You can't. It's impossible to copy. You have to be. You can only they can make that music. Whereas you could do a version of the Rosies, it might not be as good, but it's because they're a bit more traditional in a sense. That you could do versions of them. But I mean, how do you copy the Mondays? It's impossible, isn't it?
Didn't you write about Big Arm when Paul was involved in that?
I remember writing about that, yeah. I thought Big Arm was good, but I think it's a difficult time to do it, wasn't it? Because I think, again, a lot of music's timing as well. You know, the Mondays probably would never have made it until everybody started taking E. You know, people just didn't understand what they were doing until everyone was as wonky as they were, and then it all started to make sense, didn't it? So with Big Arm, there was a really good band, but you can't always make the music scene go your way, can you? I know that full well. You know, I've been doing this 40 years and it never goes in my direction. But it doesn't actually measure it's not a measure of how good or bad your band is, you know. You can only ever do your thing and hope that people get onto it. That's every band will tell you that. In a way, it was good that the Mondays put the proper lineup together again and went back out on the road, so everybody got a payday or a sense of respect, you know, because it must have been good, even though they still don't get they never get as big as I think they should be. You know, get to 2,000 people a night for playing all your old hits is still pretty good. You know, it's still a great party, isn't it?
Thank you so much, John.
Nice one, Ange.
Really appreciate you doing it.
No, thanks for asking. All right, bye.
That's all we got for you this week. Please join us again, same time, same place next week. If you want to listen to next week's episode in audio form, it's dropping now on all of the podcast platforms. Thank you to our amazing patrons, you know who you are. And of course to the Sunday Club who always join the chat on YouTube as the episodes premiere. We're playing out with the Gianni Panettone, aka John Pennington remix of Big Arms Sun Rays, which is a fab summer tune. Have a fabulous week, everyone. Big thanks to Manchester's legendary John Robb, and of course to the big man himself, the late great Paul Anthony Ryder. Lots of love. Bye.
I've just arrived with my case full of dough. A Jamaican beach is now my home. I wanted hot, that's what I got. A Jamaican beach is now my home. Shaun, here it comes. Glistening Productions.